both the Liberal and the Conservative leaders appealing for support in the key ridings of the Greater Toronto Area. Mark Carney announced his policy on crime today in Brampton before heading to Hamilton to meet with supporters and volunteers.
Tariffs are not the only American policies that are threatening our economy and our society. Criminals are taking advantage of irresponsible American gun laws and their weak border enforcement to bring illegal guns into Canada.
Carney made a number of promises today to crack down on crime, one day after his Conservative rival announced his own tough on crime agenda. The CBC's Catharine Tunney is with the Liberal leaders' campaign. Catharine.
David, in a campaign dominated by tariffs and Trump, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has wanted to talk about public safety, making tough on crime policies a cornerstone of his pitch to Canadians. Well, today, Liberal leader Mark Carney also wanted to talk about the issue, an area the Liberals haven't always been seen as the strongest on. Speaking at Sheridan College, Carney pledged to toughen bail conditions for violent car thefts, home invasions, and human trafficking. There is also a big emphasis in today's announcement on firearms. Carney promised if re-elected, the Liberals would recruit more Mounties and hire more border agents. Part of his promise, a crackdown on guns coming into Canada. Carney also recommitted to the buyback program, a file that has been, frankly, a political mess for the Liberals, taking years to get off the ground following tensions with gun owners, the provinces, and even Canada Post. Carney took aim at Poilievre, saying the Conservative leader can't say he's tough on crime or take intimate partner violence seriously without talking about gun control. Carney brought his message to Brampton, where crime has been identified as a key issue, just hours after Poilievre visited the region and held a rally leaning on his anti-crime message. Both parties are seeking support in the vote-rich GTA. David?
All right, Catherine, thanks so much. That's the CBC's Catharine Tunney in Brampton, Ontario with the Liberals today. Also in the Toronto region today, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. He began day 19 of this campaign in Milton, pitching his plan to build more homes and cut crime rates. Tonight, Poilievre holds a rally in a rural township outside of Waterloo.
Like Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney simply doesn't understand the struggles of ordinary Canadians who are priced out of their communities and out of the dream of home ownership. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal term of doubling housing costs. We need a new government for a change.
Poilievre announced details about his plan to make homes more affordable. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is covering the Poilievre campaign. Marina.
Hey, David, a very snowy day here in Milton, a fast-growing community in the southwest edge of the Greater Toronto Area, where housing is a major concern. Pierre Poilievre announced his latest plan to deal with the housing crisis inside a half-built condo in a new development behind me here. Now, he says a Conservative government would reward municipalities if they cut their development fees. Now, cities collect this money to pay for surrounding infrastructure. Think roads, sewers. But these fees have gone up rapidly across Canada over the last few years, and Poilievre says they are too high. So he's promising that for every dollar that municipalities cut of these fees, a Conservative government would match up to $25,000 per home. Now, the Conservatives have previously said they would also take away federal infrastructure money from big cities if they don't build new homes fast enough. I should say it's politically significant that Poilievre is making this kind of announcement here. We're actually in a new riding of Milton East, Halton Hills South. This will likely be a battleground seat. Suburban Toronto and Southern Ontario is incredibly important to anyone trying to win an election. There are a lot of ridings here, and they tend to swing between the Liberals and Conservatives. Right now, many of these seats are red, and so it's likely the Poilievre team will continue to campaign in this area, hoping to turn them blue. David?
All right, thank you, Marina. That's the CBC's Marina von Stackelberg traveling with the Conservative campaign. So the Liberals and the Conservatives are in battleground Ontario today, which is probably the ball game for much of this election, both talking about issues that have dominated the public's concern before Donald Trump returned as president and will likely persist after. So these are the latest poll numbers from the CBC poll tracker in Ontario. We're just looking at Ontario right now. The Liberals As you saw there, they were ahead by 10 points. Okay, we're going to begin there with the power panel. James Moore's a former Conservative cabinet minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in the studio, Cameron Ahmad was a head of communications to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. All right, good to see you all. James, let's start with you. I mean, Ontario, there's no Conservative victory without a big breakthrough here in Ontario. Those numbers show a pretty tough path. I mean, what's your sense of the state of the Conservative campaign right now?
Well, I mean, look, it's a fight for sure. You know, 1 in 3 Canadians live in the province of Ontario. It's Battleground 416, Battleground 905. Pierre Poilievre's been a politician from the province of Ontario. I think he understands what's needed there. But obviously, there's a lot of debate about how to most effectively reach out to the people of the GTA. Focusing on housing is a good thing for the generational voters who have been accessible to Conservatives over the past little while. But, you know, there's still a lot of time on the clock. The leaders' debates will matter. And it's a tough fight.
Andrew, what are your thoughts? As someone who is in, as we call it, the vote-rich GTA or vote-rich Ontario, whatever cliche we all fall back on during election campaigns. We just call it Toronto mostly. What are your thoughts?
I just call it home. But it's... Yeah, I mean, this is certainly an interesting set of issues to be bringing up here. I'm still not sure that this is the ballot question in Ontario. Very much focused still on the economic, potential economic impact that the tariffs are going to have. So bringing some of these secondary questions forward, I think, are showing either that is waning as a ballot question, or that they are desperately trying to reposition to get it focused onto other things. I'm just not sure at this point. I mean, when we look at what's shaping up across the country, that the map looks tougher for the Conservatives. It looks, I mean, Ontario's always going to have a bit of a fight here. Obviously, The lower mainland of BC is competitive. If you believe what the polls are saying, people at Poilievre rallies seem not to, but if you do, it looks like even places like the small cities across the prairies and the large cities, Edmonton and Calgary, are starting to become more competitive. So, I mean, everything's in play at this point, and I think that's what you're seeing the politicians do.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Luckily, nobody here is wearing any of those hoodies. Cameron, your thoughts on where this race is right now? I mean, a 10-point lead in Ontario, considering where this year started for your team. I mean, what do you make of how things stand today?
I mean, I think obviously the Liberals have had the wind in their sails since the beginning of the campaign and since right before. And the Conservatives are now faced with, for the first time in, nearly 2 years, being, in second place in the polls. This is not the attitude or the posture that the Conservative leader has adopted as the underdog who's fighting from behind since he's been leading in the polls. But I still think that everything is, across the country, extremely competitive. Nothing should be taken for granted, especially now in this context politically and internationally where the President of the United States is largely dictating the terms of what we talk about in this election. And so many more things can happen. Debates can happen, right. Other unforeseen events. So nothing should be declared at this stage. But of course, it is an uphill battle for the Conservatives. And I think whether Pierre Poilievre can redefine himself, frankly, and show that he is more of a rassembleur, someone who can bring people together as opposed to an aggressive attack dog, who is, who name calls all the time. That's probably the only thing that can really turn his image around for a lot of people who are on the fence.
Well, Sherelle, we've seen a lot of those calls from Conservatives for the Conservative leader to go in that direction, and there have been some moments of it, but broadly, it still sort of reverts back to form. I mean, what are your thoughts on a meaningful change like that happening more than halfway through this?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on what you count as a meaningful change. I mean,
well, meaningful with the voters. I mean,
with the voters, for sure. Yeah, because I don't know if we're going to see a real shift in terms of, the leader of the Conservative Party, his demeanor, his stance, his approach. He has acknowledged that, he said that sometimes his passion can come out as hostility, I believe is how he put it, but that he was going to be trying to adopt a more hopeful tone. I'm not sure if we've seen that yet, but Ontario is an interesting case because, there was just a provincial election here, and the ballot question there was, obviously there are some real differences in the types of governments that provincial voters, Ontario voters are voting for provincial government versus a federal government, what they're going to be looking for. But Premier Doug Ford, he fought that election pretty much solely on dealing with the Canada-U.S. issue. Things like housing, things like crime, things that are also in provincial purview weren't really that much of a ballot box issue. So I do think it's important for parties to be putting these platforms out, because people do need to look at them and people do need to scrutinize them, because these could be the things that could be driving our country for the next 4 years. But when it comes to what are the things that Ontario voters specifically are looking at, it's a little hard to gauge as to what they think is actually important right now.
Well, like certainly southwestern Ontario, I think it's the trade exposure from, Windsor to Hamilton, Kitchener and all those areas. I mean, that's got to be driving things, right, in terms of like people who would live in auto towns or supply auto towns. So, James, I wonder about this, like, the polls have shifted dramatically, right? This 25-point lead, when the Liberals were at their absolute lowest point, and probably it was an overinflated Conservative number. A lot of shy Liberals went there who've now gone back, and then Bloc and NDPers have gone to the Liberals. The Conservative numbers kind of held. So was there a course correction or an issue correction or a tonal correction they could have made in this campaign to this point, you think? Or was it just the issue set changed and soft progressives have rallied around the Liberals?
Well, look, the campaign isn't over yet, right?
Of course,
Hillary Clinton had a 99% probability of winning the election 3 hours before she lost. So everything is still on the table, to Cameron's point.
Yes.
A lot of time left in the campaign. Conservatives have a great ground organization. They have lots of things that they can talk about in the debate to distinguish themselves from Mark Carney. If there was a pivot point, I mean, I think two things retrospectively that they might have done. One thing, which is it's very difficult to be the leader of the opposition in the country. It's one of the hardest jobs in Canada to be the opposition leader. And if you're seen as being the principal critic, it's very difficult in the same press conference or in the same media moment to then be seen as a prime ministerial candidate. I've always been of the view that when you decouple optimism from conservatism fails. Mm-hmm. And Pierre has always been at the peak of his powers when he is putting a positive vision forward about an energy corridor, making Canada tax competitive, helping people build homes, making streets safer, allowing people to have access to more opportunity, making sure that new Canadians have full access to the economy in Canada from coast to coast. Like, these are all really good, positive messages that I think resonate well. Yesterday, when Donald Trump said that he was going to do a 90-day timeout on the global tariffs, but Canada was still, we're still at risk in steel and aluminum and autos. I think there was an opportunity over the past 24 hours for the Conservative campaign to sort of repivot and reposition the campaign to say, there's been a 90-day timeout, but Canada has been left behind. I will make sure Canada is not left behind. And I will make sure that in the 90 days when Donald Trump seems to be prepared to reconsider what he's going to do globally, that Canada will be positioned to be strong and sturdy to withstand whatever Donald Trump may pivot to going forward. And we will make every effort to ensure that the steel, aluminum, and auto sectors will be fortified and have full access to the American economy moving forward. I think there's a window of opportunity to position the first 100 days of a Pierre Poilievre administration and what it may look like in terms of a positive vision for the economy. And I'm surprised that today they sort of went back to what they were talking about last year and the year before, which was building homes and kind of missing a communications moment given what we're seeing in the United States.
Well, I guess part of the risk is the 90 days may not last 90 minutes after you say it, because it is right. Donald Trump, so there is that, to your point. But just Andrew, your quick thoughts.
But you take your communications windows as they appear. And
gotcha.
This is where we are.
No, I think you make a good point there. Andrew, just your quick thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, housing is a vulnerability for the Liberals. I mean, this is the big question as to, okay, so what's changed? You've changed the leader. They've been very effective at, focusing on the ballot question, or a ballot question. They've also been very good at taking away those things that Canadians hated about the Trudeau government. The carbon tax, the extension of the capital gains. What they've not been able to explain thus far in the campaign is, what are they actually going to do that's different, that's going to solve the housing problem? What are they actually going to do that's different, that fixes people's concerns about public safety and crime? And what is it that's different about this government that couldn't get done under the Trudeau government? That's a tough question for Carney to answer, because there's no way to easily answer that without throwing half your cabinet under the bus, or with completely pivoting in a way that doesn't seem genuine and authentic. So I think that this is not an entirely bad strategy on the part of the Conservatives to start bringing this up, but it does start to, I think, draw us back to a point where it's like, well, is that really what I'm focused on at this point?
Okay, we've got to hold the conversation there, but a perfect segue, because we have a Minister of the Cabinet standing by. Because on day 19 of the election campaign, the Liberals and the Conservatives are promising to crack down on crime. Both parties say they'll also strengthen bail laws to keep repeat and violent offenders in jail.
What I'm saying is, get rid of the revolving door and replace it with an iron gate. The rampant offenders, they will be locked up for good where they belong. That is how we're going to stop the crime.
To ensure that Canadians feel safe in their homes and communities, we will make bail harder to get. We will toughen sentencing guidelines for repeat offenders charged in relation to stolen cars and to violent and organized crime.
Okay, we're going to talk more about this issue because standing by to join us is Liberal Party candidate and Minister of National Defence, Bill Blair. You can see him there. Bill Blair, it's good to see you, sir. I want to start with the bail reforms that are part of this law and order plan. Your party's promising to put a reverse onus on certain offences for bail. But to this point, your party has been pretty consistent in saying the bail measures that exist under C-75 under the current laws have been good enough and done the job. How do you square this new proposal with the past statements of members of your cabinet?
Well, I can tell you that I've been involved, David, in a number of discussions with the Prime Minister and with our entire team. We've talked about what needs to be done to keep our communities safe, and the measures that the Prime Minister announced today are exactly what is required to ensure that our prosecutors, our courts, and the police have the tools that are necessary in order to deal with people's concerns and legitimate concerns about crime and violence in their communities, strengthening the law as it pertains to bail, the reverse onus, placing the onus on the offender to show why they should be released, and empowering our courts to make the right decisions with respect to bail is exactly what is required. Quite frankly, what is not required is slogans and sort of vacuous statements that don't really amount to anything. This is real action, David, and I've been meeting with the Prime Minister and his team. I spent most of my life in public safety. I was a detective for 20 years before I was the chief of police.
Right.
And I've been in those bail courts, and I believe that the measures that are proposed today will be a very effective response to concerns that Canadians have with respect to repeat offenders getting out on bail.
Right, so you're talking about making it harder for people charged with violent car theft for a criminal organization, home invasion. But I go back to past statements you made, Minister, in 2018 about C-75, about how the bill seeks to reduce the imposition of bail conditions that are unreasonable. It encodes the principle of restraint. People have been calling for actions like this and changes like this on bail for years now. And the answer from the Liberals has always been that's going too far. We need to leave it to the judges. And you know, the laws that are in place were guided by decisions of the Supreme Court of Canada. This seems to acknowledge that those positions maybe weren't the right ones.
And David, there are things that the federal government can do. And for example, Prime Minister Carney mentioned today about strengthening the guidelines for sentencing that sends a very clear message to the courts of what our expectations are and the need to consider for sentencing the dangers of the individual and the likelihood of repeat offending. Right. Those are clear directions that can be given to the courts by the government that our judges can appropriately act upon. Now, and David, I think it's important to understand our detention facilities in every province right across this country are already crammed full of offenders, and I think the people we should be keeping in jail are the people not that we're angry at, but that we're afraid of. People who represent a real threat to our safety and to the safety of our communities. And we're making sure that the law is in place and the tools are provided to the police, to our prosecutors, and our courts to make sure that we can make the right decision with respect to these dangerous individuals and keep them in custody, because quite frankly, the full force of the law needs to be dealt with appropriately for those repeat and violent offenders. But at the same time, I think we have to trust the police. We have to trust our prosecutors, and we have to trust our courts. But we can also provide them with the resources they need. The Prime Minister announced 1,000 new RCMP officers, for example, with additional resources for our public prosecution services and for clear direction for our judges to make the right determination with respect to violent offenders.
Okay, but you talked about, this is the part where you talk about toughening sentencing guidelines. We're directing courts to primarily consider denunciation and deterrence when sentencing repeat car thieves, for example. Your government has always in the past pushed back against the mandatory minimums proposed by the Conservatives. I know that's not what this is, but the argument has been judicial discretion is important, leave it to the judges, and now you're bringing in new sentencing directions. Like, I know it's not as far as what the Conservatives want to go, but it is trying to tell judges a little bit more clearly what they should be doing with their discretion, is it not?
And David, our courts, our Supreme Court has been very clear about the constitutional issues that arise from mandatory minimums because, quite frankly, it's a very blunt approach. I think it sounds good politically, but it doesn't actually work. But what does work is providing very clear direction through sentencing guidelines, and we can do that within the law to let judges know that how they must prioritize deterrence and the protection of our communities in their sentencing guidelines. I think that's the right way to do it. It will also, I'm very confident, it will have the support of our Supreme Court. It will be charter compliant, but it also will do the job of helping our police, our prosecutors, and our courts protect citizens from violent offenders.
But the broad direction of this, with reverse onus and tougher sentencing guidelines, is that more people will spend more time in jail longer, is inevitably where this would go. And you said yourself, they're overflowing, there's not enough space, there's problems with conditions, and this is why the principle of restraint was something your government championed in the past. So how do you square that?
Yeah, no, very, very simply. And again, I have spent a great deal of my life in those courts and in those bail courts and testifying. There are some individuals, David, who represent a significant threat to community safety. And those individuals require the full force of the law and all of the concerted efforts of our police, our prosecutors, and our courts to protect society from the danger that they represent. And at the same time, there are a number of other offenders who don't represent that threat to public safety. And we should, where appropriate, make sure that we are dealing with those individuals as expeditiously and appropriately as possible. But when they don't represent a significant threat to our safety, there are other ways to manage their presence in our society through bail conditions and for the proper enforcement of those conditions. But there are some people that the only deterrence and the necessary protection of society requires that they be incarcerated. And we've got to make sure that the law is able, and the police, our prosecutors, and the courts are able to deal appropriately with those guys and keep them in custody. And at the same time, I think we also have to be balanced and reasonable in how we manage the vast majority of offenders who don't represent a significant risk to public safety. There are ways, in my experience, to manage that through bail conditions. It's an important responsibility of the police. And David, I will tell you, I believe, and I've known from 40 years of experience in keeping people safe, cops count. And when the Prime Minister announced, for example, that we are going to add 1,000 new RCMP officers, that's important because I remember too vividly back in 2013 when Mr. Harper cut over 1,000 RCMP officers, cut nearly 1,000 border security officers, closed down every integrated proceeds of crime unit across the country. They did it to save money, and they put us at risk.
Right, but you are now taking steps to deal with violent car theft from criminal organization, home invasion, human trafficking, and smuggling offenses. These have been issues that have been discussed in Parliament for years. So, you were criticized as a government for not taking action on it. I mean, what do you say to people in the GTA and Brampton, where Mr. Carney was today, who are skeptical that it took an election campaign to get to this level of commitment?
David, I would simply remind them that our government actually took action last year. There's been a significant reduction, for example, in car theft in this country. And the reason for that significant reduction is because we made investments in the police. We made investments in our border security. We worked very hard in order to bring that down. The ways to prevent car theft is make it harder to commit the crime, more likely to get caught, and the serious consequences for getting caught. We've been addressing those things, and what Prime Minister Carney has proposed today is to build upon that effort to finish the job of making sure that our police have the resources that they need, our prosecutors are able to target those violent offenders and repeat offenders who continue to plague our communities, and that our courts have the clear direction and the resources that they need to deal appropriately with those individuals. This isn't something that just began in this campaign. It's work that we undertook when car theft and particularly violent car theft began to increase. Okay. There's also important measures that the Prime Minister spoke about today too, about protecting children, about protecting people in intimate partner violence and domestic violence situations, and to deal more effectively with gun crime and gun violence through stricter gun control. All of those measures build upon the work that we have done, but it's also a response to the very legitimate and understandable concerns that Canadians are expressing to us.
Mr. Blair, I'm out of time, but I have to ask a question about the cabinet meeting, the cabinet committee meeting that's going to be happening tomorrow. The counter tariffs are in place because of the auto tariffs, steel and aluminum tariffs. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, said yesterday, I have no idea if this is still the live position of the U.S. government, but I'm going to put it to you. He suggested that China didn't fare well when it retaliated, and maybe Canada might want to think about its retaliatory tariffs. Is there a thought process, or is there a world in which this government might drop its counter tariffs with the U.S. based on the events of the last 48 hours or so?
Our tariffs were, in fact, reciprocal and a counter to the tariffs that were imposed against our country, contrary to the agreement of the CUSMA agreement against our country. There was a conversation clearly between the Prime Minister and President Trump in which this was discussed, and an agreement was reached between the leaders of both of our countries to reconvene after this election and to begin the important discussion of renegotiating, if necessary, the CUSMA agreement and to address those tariffs. I believe that the response that we have undertaken has been proportional, necessary. We have to.
And it will stay in place, you think, sir?
I believe that it is important that we show that we are able to respond forcefully, and we will do what is required to defend our citizens, our workers, our economy. And I believe that President Trump actually respects that. And you saw a change in his demeanor and his approach to this country after his conversation with Prime Minister Carney, because I think it's very clear to the president that he knows he's dealing with an adult, an experienced man who's prepared to come and have those important conversations with him after our election.
Okay, Liberal candidate Bill Blair, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. That's Bill Blair. We did ask for a Conservative candidate to talk about their crime policy, but no one was made available.